Welcome to our video series on offering instant software downloads to your visitors. In this video, we'll show you how to test your software. One of the most important steps in the process when creating software is what's known as test runs, testing cycles. And I've created this, a Word document that I used when testing the Instant Web Quiz Generator. And as you can see, I aimed for 3 test runs. And what I mean by that is, I receive the initial version of the software and I test it thoroughly. Any problems I find, I report here, and then I send this document back to the programmer who should resolve those issues. I then test those issues to see if they've been resolved. If they have been resolved, that's good. If they haven't been resolved, then I tell the programmer, and we keep working on them until they are resolved. And then, once those initial issues are resolved, that's the first test run out of the way. Then we can go on to test run 2, which is a full, detailed test run of the entire software again. And then any issues we find, and so on and so forth. Basically, I suggest testing the software in full 3 times, because then you make sure you have all issues out of the way. And during this process, any issues you do find, as I mentioned, detail them to the programmer, and then check to see if they've been resolved before moving on to the next test run. As you can see, my color code here, my resolved issues are in green, open issues in blue, important notes in yellow. So this is test run number 1 of 3. So description of issue, this is my column. For example, as you can see, at the moment every question appears with check boxes, whether it's a multiple choice question or a single choice question. This causes issues with the functionality of the quiz, etc. So that's my description of the issue. The programmer responds, fixed as stated here. And then I check and say, appears to be working well, therefore resolved. The next issue. On the results page, when you press the button to retake the quiz, as well as going back to the main page, and so on. The programmer says fixed, and I agree after checking his fix. So this carries on. Okay, that's an important note in yellow. Basically, what I've done here, we've tried to get this code working for all web browsers, this JavaScript code working for Internet Explorer and Mozilla Firefox, but we had problems with Firefox. And in the end, we decided just to stick with Internet Explorer because that's got the majority of the market, and trying to get the code working for Firefox was too much of an issue and wasn't that important, so I disregarded that. And further notes. So that's my first test run. Then test run 2 of 3. And I just carry on detailing what was found, the programmer's response, and then I check whether it's been fixed or not. So this is the system I use for cataloging the issues that came up during testing. So if I close this, how exactly do you test software? Well, basically, let's minimize this. I have the software here, and now, of course, since this is the final software that's been thoroughly tested, it works well. But if we go to the software, let's go to the multiple choice page. To test software, you basically try to do every possible thing that could happen, that could go wrong. For example, this prompt appears. Maximum of 50, it says. But what happens if I typed in a large number? Okay, that's fine. That's a good response. If it had done anything else, that could have been a bug, which would have needed work. If I cancel, okay. But how about if I enter some letters instead of numbers? Okay. These are all good responses. Anything else would be a bug that would need fixing, because the end user, almost anything can go wrong when you're using software, so you have to allow for all these issues and make sure it's working, and make sure you're covered for such events. For example, let's type in some symbols. The software should check for these symbols and give the correct message. And it does. So all those issues were initially in the software, and through testing they were fixed. And that's why the software works well. So let's say 2 questions. So you would need to check. When I enter 2 questions, do I actually get 2 questions, or do I get more, or do I get less? And that all looks okay. Question 2. So essentially, when you test it, you need to test every aspect of the software. Does it do what you want it to do? Does it work? When you do something unexpected, what happens? Does the software code put on its, does entering letters instead of numbers cause real issues? As I just demonstrated, this software allows for such events happening, which is very important. So basically, the whole point of testing is that you have to go through every single possible aspect of the software, and you have to try to break the software. You have to try to stop it from working. And if it keeps going and works without problems regardless, then that's good software. So that's why you have to test it thoroughly. That's why you report any issues you find to your programmer, who should then fix them. One important point to mention, though, there is a fine line between fixing bugs and adding features. Sometimes during testing, you may actually decide, I want to add this. And if that feature wasn't initially agreed to, then your programmer may quote you extra, perhaps as a separate project. So you don't want to keep changing the scope of the project. Fixing bugs is important, but adding extra features, generally you would end up paying more for that. So that's something to be aware of when you're testing the software, and if you start feeling you want to add extra functionality. So after planning the software, and while the software gets written, effectively there are 3 stages. There's alpha software, the first very rough version of the software you test to see if the program is on the right track, and then get back to your programmer with any feedback and with any bugs you find, and even any further feature requests. But again, you may need to pay him more for those. You tell him about any issues, and he should resolve those and send you a new version. And then you check to see if they've been fixed. And if they haven't, you tell him they haven't. So he keeps fixing them, and you keep testing them until they're resolved. And then that becomes the beta version of the software. Then you do another full testing cycle of the software. You test everything, you try to break the software, and if it all works properly, that's great. But if there are issues, again, you report those. And I do recommend 3 test runs so you catch absolutely everything, so all issues are resolved. And then at the end, you have the final, what's called the release candidate software. Software that can be released to the public. And that's the final release. So your project should be finished. You can pay your programmer, and then you can compile your software, your JavaScript code, into an ebook and start making it available. In the coming videos, I'll talk you through how to take the JavaScript code, turn it into an ebook, as well as some further little-known but important issues that you should be aware of when creating JavaScript software.